This is an interview conducted by Helen Ingram and Wendy, Gwynn, Laird Benner with Carlos Nagel in 2010.
It's May 27th, and Gwynn, Laird Benner, and Helen Ingram are interviewing Carlos Nagel. I think we'd like to begin, Carlos, with some sense of what you make of the border story. You've been involved in it. Maybe you'll tell us how you got involved in it for a really long time. And we just like to know how you've been involved in it and where you think the border, both cultural and environmental sustainability, where you think it's going. Where
it's a nice, big, broad statement of something like, what do you think of the universe?
Exactly.
Well, I was brought up bilingually and biculturally in Argentina, and my parents separated when I was 14. My mother's a New Yorker, and she returned to New York. And so from being a Buenos Aires brat, I became a New York brat. But then various circumstances propitiated the privileges that I've been benefited by. My life is an extraordinary, I look at all the blessings and all the privileges, and I think, it's not about money or socioeconomic, it's about the opportunities that I've had, the opportunity to share. Receiving isn't giving, for me, as a very important principle. And so anyway, one thing led to another with the U.S. Army and whatnot, and I ended up at the University of Washington, and I ended up with a degree in museum administration. Because I wanted to take the objects in the museum and create a historic novel for them so that they would come alive. And for museums in the late 50s, that was, you had them academically or aesthetically or just to preserve them. And so when I graduated, I looked around and I thought, dusty basements and cobwebs, and what am I doing here? And so some friends asked me to come down for a year to Puerto Rico with a primate research facility because of my language skills and because of I'm a good mechanic. I love to build things. And so I went down for a year and stayed 10 years and was in charge of 4 offshore islands with 1,000 monkeys. I was involved with all of these different personnel, sugarcane cutters and day laborers and agricultural workers, and I had to forge a team. And I was so far away from the centers of power that I started just inventing management. And I started applying what I didn't know then was a participatory approach. The idea of how do you create a team, how do you have consensus, and how do you do the thing of working as if you were in a family, where there's an ebb and flow and things just are. So finally, after 10 years, Puerto Rico, I decided it's time to return to the States. So the year before, I took my adoptive son, and we took a 6-week-long trip all through the southwestern United States. So we camped out everything except 4 days, I think, during the entire time. It was an opportunity for Jose Manuel to see the United States and kind of sense the cultural stuff. And we stayed with friends in California. And then we returned, and finally in '68, I left. And I landed back in California from where I had been hired. I didn't have a job. And I looked around, and there wasn't anything, so some friends started saying, hey, Nagel, we have this leaky faucet, and we have this switch that doesn't work. Could you fix it? And I developed this little company that took care of nuisance repairs. I developed some toolkits that fit very well in the back of my station wagon, and suddenly I was dealing with the little old ladies of both genders in the Berkeley Hills. And it was a very prosperous thing, and I was enjoying myself. I refinished like 6 grand pianos, and there was all this stuff there. Anyhow, what happened, one of my clients was the head of personnel, human resources at the University of California. And one day she said, down at the new Oakland Museum, they're looking for people with administration museum experience. And she said, why don't you go and apply? And I said, okay, tomorrow, I won't come at 9, I'll come at 11. I want to apply. So I went down, and at 10 o'clock, I called her, and I said, I won't be able to come to the weekend. I've just been appointed associate director of the Oakland Museum. How these things happen, I have no idea. Well, then from there, I was hired to be director of the museums in New Mexico and Santa Fe, spent 5 years there. Finally, I decided, there was a very powerful woman who had created the Santa Fe Opera, and she wanted to be the president of the board. And I knew I could not work with her because she was anathema to my way of looking at how people related to her. So one evening I was struggling with this, and so at 4 o'clock in the morning I get up, type out my resignation. The next day, the board meeting, I turn in my resignation. That same day, the Weatherhead Foundation, which had sponsored our education department and our Far North Biennial, representatives came to visit. So I remember they were sitting in front of my desk, and they were chairs without arms. And so I said, well, I have news for you. I've resigned. And they grabbed hold of the chair. I stood with them and said, no, you can't do this to us. We have all these plans for you. Well, one thing led to another. They have a ranch in Patagonia. They asked me to come down for a week for this extraordinary experience. They would invite people to spend time, like the president of Harvard and some very sophisticated professor that was a Columbian academic. So this week, and they were trying to find some way of getting me involved with them, continue my involvement. Finally, they said, you know what? There's this desert museum down here, and they have the flag of Mexico and the flag of the United States flying, and all they do is go down and collect some animals, and they come back. There's no relationship. We're going to give you some money for a 4-year program to make a Mexico program for the Desert Museum. So I arrived, remained for 4 years until the museum had a huge internal battle, and I traveled all over Mexico. I was in all 31 states, and it was a very appropriate time because it was when the environmental conscience was emerging. The law of ecological equilibrium was developed. In fact, I was in some of those discussions. I was like this little mouse in somebody's pocket. And so suddenly I was right in the middle of all this. We developed a number of programs. The Desert Museum traveled in Mexico, got hundreds of kids coming up on programs. The Junior League developed a program, a van to go down. I mean, it was really exciting. So then, 1978 comes, and I saw the writing on the wall. There was a disaster coming at the museum. For 2 years, the museum was in the news about all the employees and the board. The docents went out on strike, if you can imagine now. So I said, I've had all the politics I want with 4 boards and the legislature at the Museum of New Mexico. I'm out of here. So then, what do I do now? And people started coming to say, literally, they started saying, hey, Nagel, we want to do business with those pepper bellies across the border and their lingo. Well, wait a minute. Those are Mexicans and that's not lingo. I said, well, okay, you're going to have to learn how to deal with Mexicans. So I started doing intercultural training, 2 3-day programs, 1-day program, how the ugly American deals with a pretty Mexican, how you touch people when you don't touch, how you wait for 5 days for an appointment, how you go to lunch at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, how you learn to accept that in rural areas you may find used toilet tissue in the tub by the and all these things. But I advised 26 schools over a 10-year period, hands across the border, and it was so much fun. I traveled with the kids, got the parents and the administrators and the teachers and the kids to understand when they came up against an uncomfortable cultural situation, they would say, oh, yeah, but we talked about that, so let me see how I handle it. Learning how to handle those cultural shocks. So finally, 10 years, 1993, I thought, well, I'm out of here. Meanwhile, I had been engaging in a lot of activities and training. I started developing some community processes, mostly in Mexico, workshops on how do people get along with each other, and how do you develop the spirit of community, how you develop collaboration, how you develop a sense of trust, all of those things. And that led into a series of seminars on environmental economics for the Bank of Mexico, 5-day seminars for high-level executives. Do you want to make money with the environment? And over 5 days, we started showing them how economics and the environment are intimately inextricably related. That unless you deal with economic issues, you can't deal with the environmental issues. And you have to deal with the social issues. That triangle.
Yeah.
You know, a spirit and economics and the environment. So suddenly, you know, this is what I've been doing all these years.
Can you talk a little bit about your involvement with the Sonoran Institute and the International Sonoran Desert Alliance and that time when you and Wendy Laird collaborated together and how that developed, and maybe even something about the Governor's Commission, the Sonoran Arizona Governor's Commission, which is where you and I met all those years ago?
What happened is that I had been thinking about some way of linking people in this region, and Luther Probst had just come to the Sonoran Institute. He had been here about a year or two. You were in that first meeting with him, And so he met and said, "Well, do you have any projects that we might get involved with?" And I started talking about some of the things that I was doing in the projects and whatnot, and suddenly we found a common thread. I mean, our thinking was so much along the same lines, intuitively rather than intellectually. And so we started thinking about what might be done in the southwestern area of Pima County. And so we started having these meetings, and people came, and suddenly we had this thing, the International Sonoran Desert Alliance. I mean, it blossomed. And we had all these meetings, and there was a great deal of interest. It was time for something like this to come along. And Wendy and I traveled. Wendy got her car stolen on the border, and we used to fight because Wendy we said, no, we have to do it this way. We're at each other's throats. But that was part of the family relationship, where we strengthened our bond because we had disagreements and we were emotionally involved. And so this was one of the things that came. So here's the International Sonoran Desert Alliance. It's functioning, and it really kind of provided a stepping stone for a lot of the things that I was doing, and what I was doing fed into that. So it was a very good time to have this happen. I guess what happened was the International Sonoran Desert Alliance had gotten a lot of money from the Ford Foundation. I think close to $1 million, wasn't it?
Not initially. It was $500,000 that first year.
Yeah, but then it kept. But over the years, and then the National Park Service put in about $200,000, which nourished this, gave the funds to do this. And we had a man by the name of Reggie Cantu, who was selected as executive director. I don't know that he was the best person, but he was the person that was there, and so he became the best person just because he was present. And one of the things that I come to realize in later years is that getting people involved from Mexico in a civic activity is alien to their whole experience. Civic involvement is something you do if you have a lot of money and you create a foundation where you can manage how the money goes and who it goes to. But the idea of doing something for the community is probably a very recent occurrence. There are now more and more people who understand the importance of community involvement and really not working within a strict political or social framework. But that's the struggle we had in getting people from Mexico to come out. What they were looking at is, what can I get out of it? The International Sonoran Desert Alliance. And they were coming with a vested interest rather than the kind of spontaneity and the desire to contribute that we had. So that kind of made it awkward. Now, it reached a point where the funds ran out, and Reggie Cantu left, and a woman by the name of Tracy Taft, yeah. She came and saw this as an opportunity to do something with the Curley School. She has done a miraculous achievement. This was a miracle, but it had nothing to do with the International Sonoran Desert Alliance. The International Sonoran Desert Alliance, the organization, was a wonderful vehicle for her to collect many millions of dollars and get a project done that would not have been done if this vehicle hadn't existed. So it's interesting how things work out. For the wrong reasons, the right vehicle was there. And so I struggled to see if the involvement in Mexico could be maintained. And Lorraine, Iowa tried to maintain kind of the intercultural support. But finally, after a year or so, I went to several meetings. There was no mention of anything about Mexico. And I realized this is not where I should be. So I withdrew. And that's gone on. It's been a tremendous success, but not as we had originally envisioned.
As you're talking about these relationships, it seems to me that your own predilection for this way of working with other people, the kind of pulling people together from different contexts, was probably more important, and other people of like mind, finding other people who also believed in these flatter, less hierarchical, networked relationships.
Right.
That those people may have been more important to you than the existence of particular organizations. How would you assess the importance of laws and institutions, and I notice you didn't mention the Governor's Commission, and those kind of formal forums as compared with, or how do they relate to these personal relationships?
Well, I have a personal preference. I don't think it's not a reluctance to be involved, but I've learned to stay as far away as I can from the formal institutions. Not against them in any way, but simply I found I can accomplish so much more outside of the formal institutions, with civic organizations, for instance, with nonprofits. But in 1974, I joined the Arizona Mexico Sonora Arizona Commission. And I became the official interpreter for all of the meetings twice a year. So I was involved in everyone for 6 or 7 years. And we reached a point, and then I fought to establish the Environment Committee. I fought for years. Finally, the governor of Sonora established an Environment Committee on the Sonora side, and the U.S. had it. And Tony Certosimo was the executive director, and said, how do we do this? Carlos, you can... And suddenly I was right in the middle of the Environment Committee of the Arizona Mexico. And we continued that way. And when, let's see, what was the last? The 1988, I think it was. There was a governor who set up the Ecology Center.
Ocaña. Samuel Ocaña?
Ocaña, who set up that. Well, one of the things I did as part of the program with the Weather Foundation, Desert Museum, they wanted to have a sister institution in Sonora. So I invested a lot of time. We designed a facility. There was all this. And the governor that preceded Ocaña was thought of in the United States as a communist. And he had difficulty coming to the United States because he's a communist. And he was totally against any involvement with anything having to do with any stateside thing. It was like those gringos. And so we had developed all these programs, but then he just put it aside. But Ocaña came in and saw this is an opportunity. So there was one of the Arizona Mexico commissions, and he announced, let me just shut this off. He saw the opportunity of two things: making the Pinacate a center of ecology and establishing the ecological center.
Now, was Ocaña governor at the time, or was he the head of the centro?
No, he was governor at the time, and then he became the head of the center. Yeah, so Ocaña really was a trigger. And I remember I was an interpreter at that meeting, and so I had to step away from my interpretation because I had to talk about it.
Well, here we are talking about positions in organizations that help, but it's still mainly kind of the people here.
Yeah, even though it was a very special kind of socioeconomic level, it's still the membership fees were very modest, like $25 a year. And when Beltrones came up, Governor Felix still maintained that very good relationship. But then Beltrones came in, and suddenly this became a powerhouse. It was a time that Babbitt was governor, and so Beltrones suddenly, and I think it was Symington. Simonton and Beltrones. Both of them raised the fees like $300 or something, isn't it?
What that noise is.
It's just telling me I haven't listened. So suddenly, there was this very prestigious thing, and I thought, and then also Beltrones really organized and got things so that they were serving a political purpose.
Right.
And so I thought, this is not my bag. So I stepped away, and I have not stepped back. It fulfilled a function at a time. I contributed to it. I got something out of it, and then I wrote other things.
Can I go back a little bit to this larger narrative? You've been on the border now. I think you told me that you came to the Sonoran Desert Voices since 74. Do you want to just give me a kind of overview of where you think the border has come? I asked the same question to Luther, and I asked him if he was optimistic or pessimistic. Did he see this as a happy story or a disappointing story? And he said, you ask Carlos. He says, Carlos teaches me that I should not expect anything. So.
Go with the flow. That's my life. Yesterday they quoted Abraham Lincoln as saying, a pessimist sees a problem in every opportunity. An optimist sees an opportunity in every problem. That's me. I'm always looking for oh my God, I broke my legs. What do I do as somebody in a wheelchair? That kind of thing. I'll get a lemon, make lemonade. People bring tequila. We have a party, and my next consulting job comes. At any rate, because I figure that you structure your reality, and I have a problem with evil. I think evil it exists only in the absence of love. It's like the law of thermodynamics that states that there is no such thing as cold. Cold is the absence of heat. If you can generate enough heat, you can generate enough love, you don't have to worry. I mean, evil may be out there, but it's generate that kind of antidote. But evil has been used as a very effective, the devil's going to get you. And so you become terrorized by evil. If you don't think in those terms, you think about all the good you can do and all the good that is in everyone. If you smile at somebody, if you use somebody's name as a clerk in the store, you say, oh, how are you, Nina, today? And you smile, and suddenly she's smiling. Those are little grains of sand that do transform reality. And at any rate, that's where I am. And so, however, having said that, the kind of problems that we face today with the real as well as the super perceived danger of travel in Mexico, it makes it very, very difficult to develop linkages. So I'm not optimistic in the short term of being able to do anything in the border region. Then we have 1066.
Yes.
I mean, what is that? The Sonora Arizona Commission decided they're not going to have any meetings until this law is. So what it's done, it's really divided a very natural flow of people, a relation. I have a lot of friends in Sonora. My late partner and I sponsored a number of students. By the way, you met Aldo, didn't you? Aldo is in Idaho now with EDS.
Wow.
He's on a second relationship. He had a child with the first relationship. He has 2 more children adopted. And his mother is here getting her residency. At any rate, so many of these ties all over. And it's very sad to see this suddenly the opportunities are so limited. And I do a lot of translation. I used to do a lot of interpretation until my hearing is such that I can't really do justice. But I'm not optimistic about what can be done in the near future. Because even if the 1066 is reversed, the administration of Washington seems incapable. I think incapable, not unwilling, but incapable of doing anything with the immigration law. I think Obama is trapped in a terrible power situation in which, see the survival of doing something that's right. I think he has enormous integrity. I think the faith, the belief that we had in him, I think is justified, but we didn't realize the limitations that he faces within a very venal, mendacious system. And so I think he's doing the best. I think he's aging very rapidly. I don't know if you saw his gray hair.
One more follow-up question
go ahead.
on this, and that is whether or not, despite these what we call really difficult times, for all the reasons we can talk about, do you think that these long-term relationships, such as you formed with people in Mexico, such as the ties that have been built person to person, are they able to persist despite these problems?
You know, absence makes the heart grow fonder, but that has its limitations if absence is too lengthy. And the reason that we had these very, very positive relationships is because we got to see with each other, we got to share a meal, we got to talk about our families, we got to go to weddings and baptisms and all of that sort of stuff. And that's very, very difficult now. I have friends that can travel to the United States, and they're here, and they spend the weekend, and we have a lot of good times, but it's very limited. It's not like I used to before, go down for a weekend and spend time and, have lunch and dinner. And So I don't see that in the immediate future there's not much that can be done.
Okay.
We can continue as much as we can with true friends, but those, over time dissolve.
Okay.
You have to keep renewing these. As I did all those years, it was constant renewal.
Sure, go ahead.
Do you perceive any either positive or negative impacts on conservation, the resources, the natural resources, cultural resources of that region?
I see
either way because of
see
networks?
very adverse, because nobody's paying attention to the environment. And with the Homeland Security, what they're doing to the border, plus all the undocumented flow, the amount of trash that's being left behind, the amount of destruction of plants, the disruption of fences and cattle moving into places where they're not supposed to be, and the whole nobody's paying attention to it. Look what's happened at Oregon Pipe Cactus. I mean, that park is there in name only because it's so threatened. I mean, all the destruction that has occurred on park property, and people just are not going there. No one's going to camp out there. So there it is, and it's not serving a conservation function.
We're talking about a variety of cross-boundary networks here, and you talked about the ISDA and sort of its commitment to things that weren't directly related to the border. We've talked about, or to the Sonoran Desert. We've talked about sort of things that deal with the environment. Now, you talked a few minutes ago about another network of environmentalists and business people. Can you just talk about the variety of networks with which you are familiar or that you've been involved in?
Yeah, some of them I listed on the... there are a number of people here and names. And we talk... there is... well, one of the things, the Friends Committee is working. Immigration right now is probably the biggest conservation issue.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people who are working. There are no more deaths. There is Pastor Fife's church. There is the Friends Committee. There are people like Oscar Martinez, the historian, who has written a lot about this. Ms. Raul Saba, the head of the Latin American Studies Department. Ricardo Castro Salazar, who's with PIMA, has done an extraordinary film on young people who are facing this thing, that they were born in Mexico but raised here, and talks about that. Tom Miller, who has written about the border, and also Chuck Bowden.
Yep.
And I think those are people who have a really interesting grasp of perspective from a journalistic writing point. Isabel Garcia is a person that I think probably could speak from an activist point of view. Because, again, we go back to immigration, and the restrictions are the biggest impact on the environment. And so if we can somehow work through that whole business of the fences. Fences have never kept people out. I mean, look at the Great Wall of China. Look at Hadrian's Wall. People will find a way around it. There's an island, I think it was Tasmania, a really small island, 6 miles wide or something like that. The British decided they were going to catch all the Tasmanians. So they put soldiers, shoulder to shoulder, marching across the island. And they thought at the end they're going to have all the Tasmanians. They looked back and they were all back there. Walls and fences don't keep it away. Plus the pressures, the economic pressures in Mexico are such that it's and the thing is that everybody says, oh well, you know, Calderon should improve the economy in Mexico and keep the Mexicans there. The problem is so huge that there's no one person that can solve it. Plus with the narcotics traffic, even the hints are, the suggestions are that the narcotics traffic is really affected all levels of government.
I noticed you mentioned Tom Miller, and I've been thinking about the kind of networks that might be built around literature. These writers don't necessarily talk to each other all the time, but...
What a great idea! The other person that I was going to mention is Keith Rosenblum.
Yeah.
Keith Rosenblum is a journalist, freelance. He's working on some very interesting, high-level political processes in Mexico. There's no point in mentioning but he is very deeply involved. And he wrote a book when Beltrones was accused of being a narco-trafficker. Keith Rosenblum wrote a book. No accuser, let's see, what was it? No accuser, no crime, but you're guilty. And it was a book that Beltrones commissioned him to write, to go and find any evidence. They said, I want you to find evidence that I'm a narco-trafficker. Because the New York Times had published a book for which the authors got a Pulitzer Prize. Keith proved that was a totally fictitious article. He went into Freedom of Information Act, he went into CIA, FBI, all of those files. There was nothing, and he wrote this book. And that is where he's very deeply involved and understands. And he understands the conservation aspects of life. And being around me all these years, he can't avoid it. So.
And you think arts organizations and cultural organizations, how do they relate to the environment?
It seems to me that may be the place. That may be the place where we could work at another level, not focusing directly on conservation, but how do we continue these ties? Because I know if there's some real purpose for me to travel to Sonora to strengthen the ties that I have, I would do it right. I'm not terrorized of going down. If I get shot, I get shot. That's it. But I need a motive to do something like that. And I think it's if a core of people could be assembled, and the writers would be the folks.
Yes, they would.
And we could. You know what I'm thinking about? Another ISDA of a different sort.
Talk to me a little bit about what makes a good networker, Carlos. You're a good one.
Acceptance, trust, a willingness to put aside your intellectual judgments and use your intuition. Certainly being multilingual is helpful. But being sensitive interculturally, you don't have to know a language if you know how to relate to people. Wendy was very successful with her limited amount of Spanish, but she really talked to people. She was lovely. By the way, I have an award. I haven't hung it up in some time. I've downsized. At any rate, I got an award for being a net weaver. A net weaver doesn't work the same strands. Draw new strands and create a new tapestry. And the Sonoran people's tapestry was the illustration. You were the trigger on that, weren't you? Yeah.
Tilda had the idea, and we just went for it.
You brought it to life. You know about the Sonoran people's tapestry. That was an amazing thing. I mean, the equivalent of Wonder Bread wrappers from Mexico being woven into a tapestry. It reflected particularly what a net weaver should be doing. Taking all these different things and different strands and not worrying about whether they're exactly structural or not. Just like I said, my indifference to formal structures. I've found other ways of getting things across.
Do you know where that tapestry is?
The last I knew, it was in...
Would make a good cover.
What was the name of the friend of the author?
Of what?
The friend of the author, of the artist.
Anne Cooper was the woman who did the weaving herself.
But her friend.
Matilda Essig.
Matilda, I think she has...
I think she does.
I think she does. Joaquin Murrieta was the last person I spoke with about where the tapestry was.
Well,
and
we're going to call him today at 1, so I will ask him where it is.
Okay, you know he's about to go.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Well, ask him where it is, and I think it would be wonderful as we weave this new tapestry to have that as our symbol of a new way of approaching cross-border relationships. Not specifically focused on environment, but the environment and others. The social relations that will strengthen economic activities that could lead to an improved environmental issue.
Okay, well, I really like the net weaver idea. You didn't use the word persistence, and other people have done that. Certainly, a characteristic of your involvement is you're indefatigable. I mean, you're always coming back, right?
I'm a fool. I'm a glutton for punishment.
But it's nonetheless true that you've had a long-term dedication.
I realize that I've been working in community processes, not development, for 65 of my 79 years.
But a lot of those have been on the U.S. Mexico border. Is there something special about
the bulk of that is, yes, since 74.
Or in educating.
What's that?
It's in education.
Yes, that's right.
Is there something special about the border that's kept you here?
Oh, it's... I can't imagine living anywhere else but Tucson.
Okay.
By the way, you know about it? Imagine Greater Tucson?
No.
Oh. Imagine Greater Tucson is a project that began about a year and a half ago. Carrie Sylvan, who's an attorney with Lewis and Rocca, decided there needed to be a process to establish some kind of pattern or some kind of mechanism to what Tucson should look like in 2040. She's assembled an initiating team of 60 people that meet once a month, talking about what are the values of our community. How do we identify those values and not create a document that goes on a shelf, but creates a process which is self-renewal. There are several smaller committees. There's an inaugural committee. We're going to inaugurate the program coinciding with Tucson Meet Yourself in October. But Carrie, I'll send you information about Imagine Greater Tucson. We have a FAQ sheet. There's a website. I'm translating all this material into Spanish for them. And I'm on the initiative committee. I'm also on the youth committee. And I'm kind of been attending other workshops. The workshop that Luther was participant yesterday at ULI, Urban League Institute, was speaking about all these issues in our region. And they feed in beautifully to what Imagine Greater Tucson is doing. And Carrie Sullivan is an extraterrestrial creature. She's the closest I've come to somebody like Wendy. Her intuitions are fantastic. Her intellect is very good. And she's doing these things to create something. And it's not something that emerged overnight like a mushroom. But there are four communities in the United States that have regional programs. Some of them, like in Utah, goes back 7 years. And they've developed the concept, what should our community be like? And not a static something, but a renewal process. And I think that what you're doing, could feed into this beautifully. Could be another dimension of Imagine Greater Tucson that involves broader region, the transboundary region, the multicultural region. We're struggling with how do we identify those strands.
When you talk about pulling these strands together, at least some of them are cultural and sort of inter-community. But some of them also relate to the Sonoran Desert. Is it as much the physical stuff as the social? putting them together, do you think?
We're still defining it.
Yeah.
We have another year and a half before we will say, this is what the process should look like.
Okay.
So there's an opportunity of doing some pretty interesting stuff. I'm so excited because you're coming kind of the right moment, like a catalyst. So if you can begin to elaborate and put together some of these things that we've spoken about.
Well, we'll continue to be in touch with this. I think that's important. Have we forgotten anything? What did you've got some notes? Have we?
No, this is just, I made...
Those are good, some additional names for us. That's great.
This is a list I'll leave with you. And I can send it to you electronically.
Okay, well, I think this is great. We were going to ask him about somebody and where they were. Did we find that out? Let's see, who was it?
Those people that were involved in the Man in the Biosphere program and all of that, and I think probably most of them are retired.
Yeah. We're going to talk to Howard Ness.
Oh, interesting.
Do you remember him?
Oh, yes, indeed.
You don't want to get a hold of Bill and Gail R. Hartman. We can't.
Yes, they're in town. Oh.
Well, I know, but I don't have their email address.
Okay, okay.
Here.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Let's see, is there anybody else on our list that we can't find? I don't know, but now that I know how to get a hold of you, I will get an opportunity to ask you.
Yeah, just consider them a resource.
Okay. I guess we're interested in this whole question of the narratives of the border, and it's clear that right now you see everything as a kind of a nadir, where personal relationships, new ones are hard to build. It's even difficult to maintain old ones. Are there other high points and low points? What do you think are the times of your big success? I know you're always moving forward, Carlos, and the last project is always the best one. but about the things that looking back on that you see as gems of accomplishment or
the only thing
disappointments?
One of the philosophically the way to react to that is that I find that adversity very often brings a lot of blessings.
Okay.
In its wake. And I'm trying to look, for instance, this 1066. What it's done is triggered this enormous, suddenly we have to do something about it. So it's hurting a lot of people, but at the same time, it's getting people to say, wait a minute, what the hell's going on? So my feeling is that imagine Greater Tucson, if we extend this, just about 60 miles south, there's no reason why that couldn't be part of this regional approach. And I think it might be interesting as you elaborate some kind of statement about this that we're talking about and bring this to Imagine Greater Tucson and get them to kind of expand their vision to a slightly broader region than merely the Tucson-Phoenix corridor. Because the impact on our region, historically, economically, socially, all of that stuff has been so enriched by Mexico.
Right.
And the fact is that the wall, send them all back. Well, my thing is, Hitler took, 6-7 years to wipe out 6 million Jews very efficiently. What are they going to do with 10 million in an inefficient system like we have?
Right. One other thing that is important to our project, and that is the importance of physical objects around which people accumulate. And you mentioned the wall, that's clearly something. And something else that's come up is the tapestry, which I think is a physical object, which is sort of an expression that pulls people together. People have talked about the pronghorn, the kita. Are there other physical objects? And I love the fact that you talked about the weaving. That's a terrific example of physical things, either natural or human-made, that
symbols,
pull people together.
Symbols.
Exactly.
Interesting. Nothing comes to mind immediately, but let me keep that in mind as we do this. Yeah.
Certainly there are...
Certainly the pinacate is an extraordinary statement, except that it's now so devalued in the eyes of so many people. But there's a statement that was made.
Why is it devalued?
Well, because nobody dares go across the border.
Yeah.
Keith Rosenberg had started taking some school kids around. And then the parents,
Well, if it's not the physical things, then how about opportunities for people to get together? One of the things about the Arizona Sonora Commission is that it was a twice a year, particularly the environmental committee that I belonged on, it was an opportunity to get together. Are there other forums that you think have been really played a really important part, whether they belong to part of an organization or just the kind of meetings that you put together?
None springs to mind, but that doesn't mean they don't exist.
Okay.
Let me think about that. I need to get my mind in a different set.
Yeah, well, it's important to me that a lot of what you've talked about is person to person. Is that the thing that comes up?
That's the most valuable in terms of emotionally, because when we look in somebody's eyes, it's very hard to hate them. And so I would say that if we can use these strands of our personal relationships and strengthen, like I have a number of very specific friends in Sonora that I really correspond with and send them jokes, and they're up here to visit, and I've done all kinds of things, and even bought some people cars to, I don't have any money, but the thing is that I think that wherever we can strengthen our personal relationships and reassure at least one individual that we're not like all the rest of the xenophobic, hateful people. So if we could have, it would be interesting to see if we could create some small discussion groups and maybe invite some of our colleagues or friends to come up on a small scale, not a big, massive thing. Do a dinner party for some of our friends, or have them invite us down. Wherever we can spur and strengthen those relationships, even, as I say, even one-to-one, I think then maybe we can create the next chapter of what relationships on the border are going to be. Because a lot of people want to have those relationships.
Right.
But everybody's, what do I do now? And the fear has imposed this block. But if we think optimistically.
Want to get a cup of coffee? I'm sorry.
We're trying to do an interview. Just a kind of quick question so that I'm sure that I'm understanding you. There's organizations like the Sonoran Institute, like the National Sonoran Desert Museum, like the Arizona Sonoran Desert Museum. There's the Alliance, the museum. You talk about these being bad times. Do you see those organizations? SADO is another such organization.
SADO continues its activities, and Peggy and Boyd.
I will think of it.
Okay, well.
I know who you mean.
Peggy Turk Boyer.
That's right, Peggy Turk Boyer.
They have been stalwarts. They're heroes, in my mind.
Yeah.
Over 25 years. When was it? 70, 60, 82?
30 years. They've had their 30-year anniversary.
Yeah, right, exactly. So, and they forge these relationships.
Right.
And then there are individuals such as Roger and Jeanette Clifton in Puerto Peñasco. They've done so much. They've made a lot of money. He sold his business and made sure that the people who had worked with him got a big, huge $1 million bonus. And they have set up an orphanage, and they've set up an old folks' home, contribute enormous amount to the community, and they've lived there permanently for 20 years. They're people that are truly border creatures.
But as you speak about it, Peggy, Roger Clifton, these are people working through organizations. It's not necessarily the organizations that give people the opportunity. They build the organizations. It's not the organizations that attract the people.
Yeah, it just occurs to me if it would be interesting if sometime... See, Puerto Peñasco is a fairly safe place. It'd be interesting if we could organize some kind of small meeting down there. Some people are here, and just spend an evening brainstorming, have some food and very casual, and just take a lot of notes or record or whatever. And, because these are very creative people.
Okay.
And I think that as the shock of what's been happening the last several years passes, I think what you're doing is motivating you to think
Good.
in a positive way.
Good.
So what are we going to do? And I think you get a number of creative people together, and I think we'll find a whole series of things to do that are not going to be threatened by 1066 or by the drug traffic. We need to. You could do an extraordinary service in beginning to weave that new tapestry.
Thank you. You have anything? Okay. Is there anything on your notes that you didn't tell us on the tape? I'd like to keep your notes if we could.
No, these are the notes you sent me.
Oh, okay.
And I reviewed them to kind of think of.
Okay, all right. Is there anything that we did not cover, Carlos, that you wanted?
I'm sure there is something that we didn't cover, but
I'm sure there's lots that we didn't cover.
Because we're not that great. Modesty aside. No, well, as I think of things, now that I have a depository for some of my ideas,
please,
we'll keep thinking. Maybe we just create a little space somewhere where we could feed.
Right.
I don't know whether a website or something is so easy to produce that it might be interesting to begin advertising this in a certain way and have people just contribute comments.
That would be great. That's a really good idea.
And I don't think about Facebook because Facebook is just, you can spend so much time on nothing. But I think we had a little website about this topic. Nothing fancy, just talk a little bit about what the objectives are that and saying, who would you like to join, And maybe that's the way we begin pulling in some of the strands. We need to create a new reality, given the problems that we face. Because I've been frozen. I can't do anything individually. But now I see a potential, collectively, we could do a lot.
I really like what you say about people creating their own reality and the need to create a new one. That's very nicely put.
There's a man by the name of Greg Brayton. He was an engineer for 20 years, IT. He was the president of some big IT companies. And I was telling Wendy, 20 years ago, he sat back and said, how come spirituality and science? So he began taking strands from spirituality and strands from science and wove a new tapestry, and the loom of that tapestry was quantum physics. And he's done a lot of research and study about the fact that at subatomic levels, at the photon level, it can be a wave or it can be a particle. If you're watching as a particle, if you look away, it's a wave. It's a very interesting, it's the whole thing going back to if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? If there's nobody to hear it. And he's done this without falling into the trap of ideology or credo. He talks about God with a small g. He talks about Jesus with a small j, really just illustrating how there's certain beliefs out there. But he wrote a book called The Spontaneous Healing of Belief. I'm reading for the second time because it explained the things that I didn't know I knew. Spontaneous Healing of Belief by Greg Brayton. I'll send you the collection of videos. There are 7 videos. And he talks about this. He lives in Santa Fe. He talks about this in a very low-key way. He's not selling anything. He's not trying to convince you. There's no guru. It's just, these are the things that I've observed. But they are so clearly stated about how, in fact, we do create our reality. Just to give you an example, I've created my reality all my life. I've been all these blessings and privilege. 2 months ago, I went to my dealer. I was on my 3rd Beetle Volkswagen. And I said, I want to reduce my monthly payments because it's, not much business in it. So we looked and nothing happened. So a month and a half ago, I got this card from Chapman Motors. It said, we are eager to find used diesel Beetles, which my car had been, because they're not manufacturing any more diesel Beetles until the new Beetle comes out in December. So there's scarcity, but there's enormous demand. So for the first time since 1972, this last Beetle, I bought it rather than leasing it. But in buying it, what happened, I accumulated a certain equity. And the equity was way beyond what I owed it. So I had this credit. So I got this card, I went in, they reduced my monthly payment. I turned in that car, low mileage, very well cared for. So the new car, right over there, I don't have to buy new tires for 3 years. I don't have to pay $300 for the periodic maintenance. I don't have to buy brakes. I don't have to buy a battery. How did that come? I just went and said, I want to reduce the cost of my car. It's very significant. And so I was thinking, God, what is going to happen next month? And this friend of mine yesterday, he's a member of Fundación Mexico. You need to speak with Florencio Zaragoza. I put his name on the list.
Okay.
Florencio Zaragoza, Fundación Mexico. I'll tell you in a minute. I'll just conclude this. One of the members of the board of Fundación Mexico, who's an accountant and owns a magazine and book distribution business for Mexican publications in Tucson. And he said yesterday, can I have lunch with you? His niece apparently is in a very difficult divorce, and she needs a translation of some legal documents for the purposes of her proving something here in the United States. It's a fairly substantial thing. So I quoted him a figure, and I'm willing to hear. I'm sure he's going to go ahead with it. So there's a few $1,000 he's going to